The GRU are the sort of sharp end of Russian intelligence activity against us and against all of the West. And they're very engaged in cyber activity and hacking, some sabotage, all of that. And as I say, in the ideal world, they would feel very upset and damaged by what we're doing.
Russia spies unmasked as UK takes on Kremlin. Salisbury operatives among those sanctioned. It's a piece by Fiona Hamilton, the chief reporter. And it talks about this group, which includes operatives who planned the Salisbury Novichok attack and targeted Sergei Skripal's daughter. And they're said to be a crucial part of President Putin's campaign of destabilization and disinformation. Let's talk more about this now, because it was an announcement from the Foreign Office. These sanctions are apparently the biggest that the UK has placed on Russian operatives. The question, though, is whether or not these sanctions will achieve their aim of harming Moscow's ability to finance its war on Ukraine. Let's remember the European Union has placed Russia on its strongest sanctions since the conflict began. So there's a two-track approach here. Is this announcement meaningful or meaningless? Let's speak to Sir Tony Brenton, former UK ambassador to Moscow. Sir Tony, hello.
Hello, can you hear me? There have been some technical problems.
No, I can hear you clearly. I'm just looking at the Times website. We've got the names and faces of 6 or 8 of these spies, alleged spies, and plenty of detail on their alleged crimes. And we're told it's the largest ever set of sanctions against Russian intelligence. First of all, what do you make of that claim that it's the largest ever set of sanctions?
Well, I don't quite know on what basis they're making this. There's an awful lot of sanctions around now. Several thousand individuals have already been sanctioned, and large organizations. This is a rather small addition to a very long list. And it's a slightly odd addition in the sense that, I mean, you'd say to a Russian intelligence agent that he's being sanctioned, and he will take some pride in the fact. So the effectiveness of it has to be really quite deeply questioned.
Right. And we're told that 3 military intelligence units from Russia's notorious GRU espionage agency and 18 officers have been targeted. We've got the pictures of about 8 of them on the front page of the Times for their involvement in the bombing of the Mariupol theatre in 2022. Some people have deemed this a war crime. What about the focus? I suppose Keir Starmer would call it a laser focused attention on this particular agency and those individuals.
Yeah, well, that does make sense. The GRU are the sort of sharp end of Russian intelligence activity against us and against all of the West. And they're very engaged in cyber activity and hacking, some sabotage, all of that. And as I say, in the ideal world, they would feel very upset and damaged by what we're doing. But the reality is that in their eyes, we are the enemy, and being sanctioning people in it, and they're not going to come to the UK. They have no assets in the UK. They have nothing we can directly hit, is as a badge of pride for these guys, rather than what we want it to be, which is a deterrent and a disincentive.
So if the Russians are sitting there drinking, I don't know, vodka or whatever in the Kremlin, and
vodka is the norm.
Yes, and just merely shrugging their shoulders, what's the point? Is it merely symbolic? What else is it?
It is symbolic. I mean, there are an awful lot of sanctions on Russia now. We are doing everything we can, of course, to stop Russia's campaign in Ukraine and turn them back. We're not going to go to war with Russia ourselves. So we have to find alternative means which either are or can be presented as being as effective ways of pushing Russia back into its box. And sanctions have been at front and center of that. And Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world by a vast margin. Unfortunately, the effect of those sanctions has been very limited. People say it's constrained their pace of economic growth, but actually they're still growing faster than we are, for example. People say that their economy is on the rocks, but people have been saying that, frankly, for the last 3 years and longer. And I should add that, I mean, I know the Kremlin pretty well, and the top guys there, Putin in particular, while he cares to some extent about the welfare of his people, cares much more about what he sees as necessary things for the security of Russia. And if a minor official goes up to him and says, "Sir, these sanctions are causing us awkwardness, we should try and adjust our policies with regard to Ukraine in order to get them down," Putin would send that man off to spend the rest of his life counting paperclips in Siberia.
Either that, Sir Tony, or maybe it'd fall out of a window from the 18th floor.
No, No, they don't throw minor officials out of the window.
Right.
I'm relieved to say.
Okay, well, good to hear that. What then about the timing of this announcement, the UK announcement, clearly coordinated with the EU's own declaration of its 18th set of sanctions? And I'm going to quote from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, saying that this is going to target Russia's banking, energy and military industrial sectors, and including a new dynamic oil price cap. The 18th set of sanctions. How confident are you they'll be more effective than the previous 17?
Well, they're sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, sanctions looked good at the beginning, and we imposed some pretty tough stuff, like taking most Russian banks out of the international banking system, like trying, not entirely successfully, to constrain the prices that Russians got for their oil. There's a lot there, and it has undoubtedly had an economic impact. Although not sufficient impact, as I say, to actually stop the Russians doing what they want to continue to do. But we're now running out of options, and I suspect these militias have turned up. There's no doubt that they're doing irritating and damaging things. So they're an obvious target. The question has to be as to how effective targeting them is going to be.
Yeah, and particularly if, say, the clock runs down on President Trump's 50-day deadline for the Russians to change their behaviour, what do you think will happen between now and, well, I think, how many days are we into the 50 days? About 5 or 6? What do you think will happen between now and then? And how confident are you that Trump is serious when he says, if things haven't changed in 50 days, then I'm going to release the Kraken, as it were?
Well, Trump said one thing which was undoubtedly serious, which is that he's going to allow the export of US weapons to Ukraine to resume. And that's very helpful to the Ukrainians. Interestingly, he's insisting that the Europeans pay for those weapons, which rather underlines the point that he sees Ukraine as being much more Europe's problem than America's problem. The thing about sanctions in 50 days, I have to say, looks frankly implausible. What the sanctions would consist of, to give a very clear example, is if the Chinese continue to import Russian oil, then what the threat is that the Americans will impose a 100% trade tariff on China. Now, the Americans have just lost a skirmish about trade tariffs with China over the last few weeks. And I'm sure that if this thing actually could come to pass, and it's very unlikely to do, the Chinese will turn around and say, okay, you impose 100% on us, we'll impose 100% on you. And by the way, there'll be no more exports of rare earth elements on which most of your industry depends. And then the Americans will back down. I think it's quite likely that the same will be true of India. And I'm pretty sure that they know this in the White House. And so this is noise at the moment, designed to scare Putin, unlikely to do so, and unlikely finally to be implemented.
So Tony Brenton, former UK ambassador to Moscow, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio.